Everyone, welcome to Disneyland, home of magic, dreams, underpaid workers. Oh no. But whatever. I, as a proud citizen of the United States of America, don't care about any of that stuff. I want to experience the joy of the Walt Disney Company. Those Disney executives sure must have my best interest in mind. After all, they are bravely staying open for me, the consumer. Their cast member should be glad I'm here. Okay, I'm not doing the voice anymore. One entry to Disneyland, please. Thank you. Hold on. You can't pass through. What? Why not? Well, it's because you're, a video essay YouTuber. Well, yes I am. Hey, are you me with a mustache? No? Okay, that checks out. Sorry, new park policy. We don't allow video essayists into the park. What? Oh, come on, Disney Sigma, I love this company. I'd risk my life and others in the circumstance that being in a populated area becomes a risk to public safety, which we all know is highly unlikely. What can I do to convince you to let me in? You could do an hour-long video analysis of Cinderella? Okay. So, it's come to my attention that you all don't stand Cinderella. It's okay, it's okay. I forgive you. Now, before you comment and think to yourself, hey, isn't Cinderella, like, basic? Hear me out. I used to think the same thing. You know, everyone knows Cinderella. There can't possibly be anything more to it than a basic fairy tale, right? I had this idea set in my mind, but then I actually sat down and watched it, and my opinion completely changed. For a movie made in the 1950s, it's striking how many elements hold up in the 21st century. But what's even more interesting to me are the ones that don't. And yeah, I know this is a children's film from 1950. However, I, as an audience member in the 21st century, feel like we can learn something new from re-examining the classic film. But to understand what we got, we've got to understand how we got here. Let's do this thing. Let's go on a little journey. Come on.
Was it Princess?
Was the princess you?
And she
Cinderella belongs to what I call the classic trilogy of Disney princesses, consisting of the three oldest members of the official lineup, Snow White, Aurora, and Cinderella. Their films are widely remembered as classics. An entire empire was built on their success. We see Aurora, who had 18 spoken lines and was asleep for the majority of her film.
Poor simple fools, thinking you could defeat me, the mistress of all evil. Well, here's your precious princess.
Sleeping Beauty wasn't really Aurora's story, as she's not present for a fair amount of it. Similarly, we have Snow White, whose innocence is highlighted and serves to fill a more maternal role for the Seven Dwarves, but ultimately falls victim under the same trappings that Aurora did, becoming a victim to a curse and needing the prince to save her. Both girls are not the cause of their own happy ending. Cinderella was the first princess to be the main character of her own story. Right? Well, kinda. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was a milestone in the world of cinema. Not only would it be the first feature-length animated film, but it would be the first of its kind to also be a musical. Upon its release in 1938, Jesus Christ, it became a smash hit with audiences and cemented the idea into Walt Disney and the public at large that feature-length films were going to be the future of animation. Thank you, Disney. Shortly after, production began on more feature-length films, and Fantasia and Pinocchio were released within the same year, 1940. Though they were technical marvels and made strides in the medium, the cost of production was much too high to remain sustainable. By the time Bambi, another expensive film released in 1942, Walt was sinking further and further into debt. You know, I wonder if he considered budgeting. or cutting out Starbucks. I mean, it's simple economics. But around the same time, World War II was raging along in the background and affecting the ability to reach foreign markets, restricting the company's outreach even more. This, in tandem with the company's spiraling debt, meant that in order to make ends meet, Walt opted to create propaganda films for the US military. Walt's time and energy went toward the war effort, which included the production of military training films, boosting the morale of US soldiers, and promotion of the branding of the Donald Duck as ambassador at large, a salesman of the American way.
Okay.
Yeah, Donald Duck, symbol of hope for the American people. Donald propaganda, very weird. I've never heard of anything like that before.
Close enough.
And you know, it does sound ridiculous. Now, I'd sooner trust my cat as a symbol of American freedom before anything made by that darn mouse nowadays, but at the time, using Disney characters to communicate to the masses was an integral part of government programs to educate and inform the public. Production on any feature films was to be halted, and any momentum that was being gained with Snow White was stopped dead in its tracks. All of this focus into fighting the war meant that the production of animated feature films would cease until the war was over. The few films they did release during the war, I don't want to mess this up, I'm a Mexican, I swear. Saludos Amigos and The Three Caballeros were not enough to recover from the financial failings of Fantasia and Dumbo. At this point, Walt was hanging by a thread, releasing either complete financial flops or only modest successes. Those modest successes were not their animated endeavors, but that of live action. Once the war was over and propaganda films were no longer needed, Walt decided to release anthology films of several short cartoons packaged together. Melody Time and Make Mine Music were released amidst the lack of both budget and artists in the fallout of the war.
Will soon inspire the stars to dance.
Once again, these films did not perform too well. While returns were poor, the finances gained from the films kept Walt Disney Studios afloat, but barely. At this point, Walt was backed into a corner. Financially, there was only enough resources for one final project. With no other options, the studio decided that the best course of action was to return to form with the animated feature film. Taking notes from Snow White, they looked to another classic tale, The Little Glass Slipper by Hans Christian Andersen, a tale that's been told and retold and told again across many different cultures for centuries. Even in the midst of production of Cinderella, Walt dug himself even deeper into his hole, finding himself at $3 million in debt. Gee, Walt, have you considered investing in the stock market? Maybe if you worked harder, you would have more money. Frankly, if you're in debt, you're just like... It soon became apparent that the fate of the entirety of the Walt Disney Company rested on Cinderella's shoulders. If Cinderella fails, Disney will cease to exist. Compared to Snow White and Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella does well to progress from the conventions in those films. Emphasis is placed far less on the prince and onto Cinderella herself. In fact, the prince is nigh absent through the majority of the film, and instead focus is centered around our largely female cast in Cinderella, her stepsisters, and her stepmother. I think this change is symbolized in the opening scene. Midway through both Snow White and Sleeping Beauty, both of the titular characters are placed under a sleeping curse. However, here Cinderella is shown waking up in her introductory scene in the first musical number, A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes.
Well, serves you right, spoiling people's best dreams. Yes, I know it's a lovely morning, but it was a lovely dream, too.
For the other two classic royals, sleep was a prison. It was a weapon that was used against them, turning already passive characters into an end goal to be saved. However, as shown in this first number, Cinderella uses her sleep to push her forward, empowering herself with the dreams that she has and letting them inform her ideology.
Oh, that clock. Oh, killjoy. I hear you. Come on, get up, you say. Time to start another day. Even he orders me around. Well, there's one thing. They can't order me to stop dreaming.
Day in and day out, Tremaine assigns Cinderella with task after task. No matter how miserable yesterday was for her, each day was a brand new start. Contrast this outlook with that of her sisters, who are favored and coddled by their mother.
Here in a stately chateau, there lived a widowed gentleman and his little daughter, Cinderella. Choosing for his second wife, a woman of good family with two daughters just Cinderella's age, by name Anastasia and Drizella.
They are nasty, mean people, consumed by vanity and acting in their own self-interest, which is a stark difference compared to the selfless Cinderella. They're vulgar, selfish, and unladylike. That's all there is to them, right? Right? Let's put a pin in that. We can see a stark contrast in the way that Cinderella reacts to her circumstances compared to her sisters. For example, take note of how they react to gifts.
It's mine. Why, I never dreamed it. It's such a surprise. Oh, how can I ever? Oh, thank you so much.
Mother, I don't see why everybody else seems to have such nice things to wear, and I always end up in these old rags. This sash, well, I wouldn't be seen dead in it.
You should talk. These beads. I'm sick of looking at them.
Where Anastasia and Drizella allow their own hearts to be distorted under Tremaine's will, Cinderella wakes up each day with kindness. Despite the fact that she has actively been made a slave in her own home, we see her continue on each day doing as she's asked in the hopes that someday things will get better. She doesn't know how and she doesn't know when, but faith is what keeps her going. She does the housework, kind and unwavering, because she genuinely believes in people. No matter how hard they may try, her spirit presses on unbroken. I want to use a scene that properly illustrates Cinderella's mindset. As part of her daily routine, the first thing that she does in the morning is feed the family cat, Lucifer, who is spoiled and pampered.
Here's kitty, 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 kitty. Come, kitty. Come on. Lucifer, come here.
This is a quiet rebellion, but one that is undoubtedly there and speaks to her strength and fortitude. She leads him downstairs to where the other family pet, Bruno, is thrashing about when he has a dream about chasing and catching Lucifer. Cinderella is telling Bruno, and by extension us, the audience, the way that she's learned to adapt and survive in the toxic environment she's grown up in.
Dreaming again. Chasing Lucifer? Catch him this time? That's bad. Suppose they heard you upstairs. You know the orders. So if you don't want to lose a nice warm bed, you'd better get rid of those dreams. Know how? Just learn to like cats.
Here we see her vocalize her fears in an implicit way. In her household, having dreams and wanting to break free from her circumstances runs inherently against her physical livelihood, ergo having a warm bed and home to sleep in. And those are very nice things to have. I don't know where I'm going with that. Yeah, bed and shelter, good. Instead of fighting against the systems in place, she instead conforms to it and convinces herself to love the very people that have made her life miserable in order to prevent her mental state from breaking. This here is the core of who Cinderella is. Cinderella is a person who sees the good in everyone. Lucifer, who is a spoiled, bratty cat who actively makes her life harder by making a mess of things. She doesn't tolerate Bruno's proposal to retaliate negatively, even when he rightfully deserves it.
Lucifer has his good points, too. For one thing, well, sometimes he least something good about him.
Cinderella will always choose to respond with compassion over spite. Anger is often the easier option, but Cinderella, who has every reason to be angry and bitter towards the world around her, either through naivete or strength, decides not to give in to that cold-hearted mindset and choose warmth instead. What I find increasingly interesting is how Cinderella reacts afterwards. Lucifer decides to attack Bruno and stage it to look like Bruno was the instigator.
Bruno! Oh, Bruno. Come on now. Outside. I know it isn't easy, but at least we should try to get along together.
Instead of allowing Lucifer's negative traits consume her cognition of him, Cinderella instead chooses to see the good in him anyway. Now replace Lucifer with the Tremaines.
Good morning, Drizella. Sleep well?
As if you care.
Good morning, Anastasia.
Well, it's about time.
Something that's important to understand is the wide array of emotions that Cinderella feels on a daily basis, and more importantly, why she obeys her mother's orders. She doesn't want to do them, and she knows in her heart that it's wrong, but she feels that doing these things is simply what a good daughter does. But when the fear of anything you do being a catalyst for rage lingers, you question every interaction you have. These moments are quick, but we can see her decision-making at play. She has two options: to disobey and risk being reprimanded, gaslit, and verbally abused, or to obey, to minimize harm to her physical well-being at the expense of her mental health. Cinderella either advocates for herself, only to be shut down.
Please, you don't think that
Hold your tongue. Now. It seems we have time on our hands.
But I was only trying to...
Silence!
Or disassociates from the situation.
Yes?
The carriage is here.
Oh. Why, Cinderella, you're not ready, child.
I'm not going.
Not going? Oh, what a shame. But of course there will be other times and...
Yes. Good night.
This is fight or flight. The way Cinderella minimizes her trauma happens in real life, especially to victims of childhood emotional neglect. As a society, we tend to downplay the effects of emotional abuse by the hands of our parental guardians, but I know from experience that its effects can be crippling. Oh gosh, this is gonna be one of those videos. Oh boy. In an article titled Emotional Neglect and Complex PTSD published by Pete Walker, a psychotherapist who specializes in helping adults recover from growing up in traumatized families, Walker explores the relationship that emotional neglect, denial, and minimization have in regards to how children process trauma. Traumatic emotional neglect occurs when a child does not have a single parent or caretaker to whom she can turn in times of need or danger, and when she does not have anyone for an extended period of time who is a relatively consistent source of comfort and protection. Emotional neglect alone causes children to abandon themselves and to give up on the formation of a self. They do so to preserve an illusion of connection with the parent and to protect themselves from the danger of losing that tenuous connection. This typically requires a great deal of self-abdication, i.e. the forfeiture of self-esteem, self-confidence, self-care, and self-protection. Children so need to believe that their parents love and care for them, that they will deny and minimize away evidence of the most egregious neglect and abuse. In short, trauma is the result of anything less than nurturing. Dissociation is a common symptom of children who have suffered abuse. When Cinderella ignores Bruno's pain, she is telling him to remove himself from his suffering the same way she does, by justifying the treatment they receive and removing blame from her oppressors. Abused children latch on to any kind of positive feedback they receive from their parents and delude themselves into thinking they are looking out for them, letting what little good they have done color their cognition and suppressing the negative so they don't have to face the realization that the guardian they are meant to rely on is actively hurting them. When Lady Tremaine grants her permission to go to the ball under a set of conditions, Cinderella is extremely thankful.
Well, I see no reason why you can't go. If you get all your work done,
Oh, I will. I promise.
and if you can find something suitable to wear.
I'm sure I can. Oh, thank you, stepmother.
Mother, do you realize what you just said?
Of course. I said, if.
She still wants to be a good daughter and wants her mother's approval, and that desire comes at the expense of her own autonomy. Only when Fairy Grandma gives her the America's Next Top Model makeover she deserves does she learn to live for herself and what she wants. Compare this to how Anastasia and Drizella react to what they perceive as a threat. She runs down to the foyer in the hopes of being with her family, to have her one day where she feels special.
Please wait for me. Isn't it lovely? Do you like it? Do you think it will do?
Cinderella, Mother, she can't. You just can't, Mother.
Girls, please.
Instead of internalizing their feelings, they react with overt anger. And in a fit of desperation, Anastasia and Drizella tear her dress to shreds.
They're my bees. Give them here.
Oh, no.
Oh, and look, that's my sash wearing my sash. She can't.
Oh, no, please stop.
This is mine. And my ribbon. This is mine. Take kitchen ring. Oh, you are straight.
Girls. That's quite enough. Hurry along now, both of you. I won't have you upsetting yourselves.
On first glance, we can see that Lady Tremaine's ideology succeeded. Destroying others for your own personal gain and valuing materials over people are effective. For them, they've destroyed Cinderella's only material possession, and thus, her spirit. This is the point in time where Cinderella questions her entire outlook. If dreams and kindness were the reason that she ended up here, maybe it's not worth having.
I can't believe. Not anymore. There's nothing left to believe in. Nothing.
The destruction of a child's willpower. Contrast this with Anastasia and Drizella, who have whatever the opposite of a support system is. A destruction system? A damage system? You know what? No, that sounds too gamer adjacent. I don't like that. Tremaine has carefully crafted an environment around them that isolates them in their own personal world. One that tells them that in order to be happy, you must be beautiful. For them, new visitors like Cinderella, who is naturally beautiful on the inside and out, are perceived as a threat that shatters that world, causing them to do anything they can to preserve their world at the encouragement of their mother. This leads to them isolating Cinderella and treating her as less than human. This is the key difference between Cinderella and the Tremaines. While Cinderella is welcoming to the mice, accepting them as family unconditionally, Cinderella's value to the Tremaines isn't who she is as a person. To them, her value is only linked to what she does for them. And in emphasizing this, Lady Tremaine takes every effort to suppress Cinderella's will so she can be a better worker. When Cinderella finishes her assignment for the day, Tremaine assigns more and more work to an unreasonable degree, thus preventing her from moving up the social ladder to a level that is equal to them who have no laborious obligations. And that, to me, is really interesting. We live in a world where output and productivity comes before our personal well-being, and while likely unintentional, feels like something that can definitely apply to us now, especially when we consider Walt's own relationship to work and how he was kind of a shitty boss, refusing to pay his animators living wages. More in part 2. A common sentiment is that Cinderella was a weak, quiet woman that did nothing but hope to be saved by a man, and got rewarded with a prince and a castle in the end, serving as a poor role model for young girls. I'm British now. Weird. However, this interpretation ignores the difficulty of remaining positive in the face of abuse. Often in the face of difficult circumstances, it's so much easier and, frankly, expected for a person to crack under the pressure and allow their hearts to be warped and distorted, like we see with the Stepsisters. That's why the ability to withstand that and remain true to yourself and your ideals takes a harrowing amount of strength. The way she, as an abused child, still has the resilience to advocate for herself is representative of her willpower.
There's to be a ball.
A ball?
In honor of His Highness, the Prince.
Oh, the prince!
And by royal command, every eligible maiden is to attend.
Why, that means I can go too.
Huh. Her dancing with the prince!
I'd be honored, Your Highness. Would you mind holding my broom?
Well, why not? After all, I'm still a member of the family. And it says, by royal command, every eligible maiden is to attend.
Yes, so it does.
For Cinderella, her sole parental figure, Lady Tremaine, is a source of constant anxiety and pain for her. When Tremaine draws the line in the sand, emotional abuse escalating to something physical, Cinderella's heart is shattered. Wanting to be protected as a child is something that has rung true since the beginning of evolution. When a child doesn't get that from the people who are supposed to be their protectors, that desire for attachment never goes away. We often seek out and latch on to older figures in our life to make up for the holes that neglectful parenting have left behind. When we're at our worst, what is the basic thing that we all want? Someone to talk to. Someone we can trust to listen to us no matter what. This desire within Cinderella manifests in Fairy Godmother.
There's nothing left to believe in. Nothing.
Nothing, my dear? Oh, now you don't really mean that.
Oh, but I do.
Nonsense, child. If you'd lost all your faith, I couldn't be here. And here I am. Oh, come now. Dry those tears.
Fairy Godmother represents the major theme of faith, who I will be affectionately referring to as Fairy Grandma. Please, please be my grandma, please, please, please. I promise I'll do my homework every day. Never mind the fact that I'm procrastinating my homework to make this. Take note of how Fairy Godmother consoles Cinderella. She strokes her head, physically reaffirming her. When she hears her say there's nothing to believe in, she shuts the thought down because she knows that's not Cinderella speaking. That's her pain. She's there to advocate for Cinderella when she no longer can advocate for herself, not just through words, but action. Compare her physically affectionate nature to the cold, distant disposition of Tremaine. She and Cinderella often stand at a distance from each other, as if there is an empty space between them that is physically repulsing them from coming closer.
It was upon the untimely death of this good man, however, that the stepmother's true nature was revealed. Cold, cruel, and bitterly jealous of Cinderella's charm and beauty, she was grimly determined to forward the interests of her own two awkward daughters.
The only time this gap is closed is when she asserts dominance over Cinderella before destroying her dress. This contrast in physical affection positions Fairy Grandma as a source of emotional security. Fairy Grandma is everything that Lady Tremaine isn't. She's compassionate and works to get Cinderella what she needs to be happy. She's a little airheaded. Sure, she's a sweet old lady who's a little oblivious.
Where is that wand? Oh, I forgot.
But she doesn't let that stop her from doing what she has to make sure Cinderella gets what she needs.
My dear, we can't waste time.
But,
Now, don't try to take me.
Oh, I wasn't. I mean, I do, but don't you think my dress?
Yes, it's lovely, dear. Good heavens, child. You can't go in there.
When Fairy Grandma appears before Cinderella, she rewards Cinderella with everything her sisters have been desperate for. Luxury, glamour, much more than she could ever dream of. For making the decision to wake up every morning with renewed optimism, she is rewarded not just with what she wanted, but much more than that. She is ostensibly a sweepstakes winner with an all-expenses-paid trip to the castle. One of multiple readings that I got from this film was the importance of a strong support system. Cinderella, despite having a family that devalues her and uses her for personal labor, has a group of animal friends who are ride or die for her and willingly risk their lives against an evil cat, quite literally named Lucifer. People often say that the prince is the one who saved Cinderella when she did nothing, but really it's the prince that did nothing. The prince is really the mice. They are the ones that do most of the heavy lifting. Cinderella and the mice have a symbiotic relationship. Cinderella acts as a mother figure for them, clothing them and offering guidance. In return, the mice are there for her as support, giving her whatever she needs to make her happy. This here is an example of a normal, positive familial relationship. Understanding the relationship that Cinderella has with her animal friends is imperative to debunking the myths surrounding her that depict her as weak and helpless. Cinderella's motherly nature is represented in her decision to save Gus from a mousetrap. Jacques enters her room in a frantic state, telling her that a mouse that they've never seen before has suddenly entered their home.
He'll need a jacket and shoes and hat. Where? In the trap. Well, why didn't you say so?
Instead of turning their new visitor away, she immediately makes the choice to save him and take him in as one of their own, even going as far as to give him cute little clothing without even meeting him. The film takes this motherly imagery a step further when she decides to bestow a name onto Gus, further cementing him as part of her family.
Let's just slip it on for size. Uh-huh. It is a little snug, but it'll have to do. Now for a name. I've got one. Octavius. But for short, we'll call you Gus.
Found family trope adjacent. When I see Cinderella caring for her gay little mice children, I see a girl trying to make sense of her world. The way she talks about dressing up reminds me of a child playing with Barbie dolls, which signals to me that her positive relationship with her animal friends is a form of escapism for her. To me, Cinderella wants to care for her mice family in the ways that she never received growing up. Just like when Cinderella helps her friends in danger, so too do the animal buddies help Cinderella in her time of need. Jacques sees Cinderella suffering and wants to do everything he can to help her.
Poor Cinderella. Every time she find a minute, that's the time when they begin it. Cinderella, Cinderella. Cinderella, Cinderella, night and day it's Cinderella. Make the fire, fix the breakfast, wash the dishes, do the mopping.
This mutual desire to see each other succeed is especially exceptional in contrast to the treatment she receives from her real family. Cinderella's desire to go to the ball isn't materialistic. Cinderella never expresses the desire for nice things, and instead gains fulfillment from gestures of love and kindness. This is the complete opposite of Lady Tremaine, who is obsessed with how she presents herself and devoid of compassion. That's a foil, baby! We know what Cinderella needs, an escape from her abusive home. But what she wants is simple. In essence, she just wants to go to a party and have fun. While the ball represents Tremaine's entirely selfish desire to marry into royalty for wealth, the ball for Cinderella represents total escapism. In the final hour before her family departs for the party, she tries to convince herself that she wouldn't have a good time. trying to rationalize herself into thinking that wanting anything in the first place was silly.
Oh, well. What's a royal ball? After all, I suppose it would be frightfully dull and boring and completely wonderful.
Despite knowing in her heart that her desires are true. This foreshadows her ultimate breakdown in the garden, planting the seed. But it's also incredibly human. I know I feel guilty whenever I take the time to treat myself. You know, sometimes I'm too anxious to go to the bathroom, so I end up pooping my pants. You know, the regular thing that most, if not all, adults do. That can't just be me, right? Right? In both instances, Cinderella's mental health would presumably spiral in the absence of people who are looking out for her. The mice, in tandem with Fairy Grandma, ultimately serve as Cinderella's support system. And that's the goal of parenthood, isn't it? I'm not a parent, but I have seen good parents on TV. We don't want to repeat the same mistakes that our parents made raising us. To nurture and raise our children to be physically and emotionally prepared to live independently in the real world. Provide a home as a place to fall back to when in need of comfort. The Tremaines are not Cinderella's family. She lives in their house, but it's not home. Her animal friends and Fairy Grandma are. That's who Cinderella is at her core. She symbolizes breaking the cycle. Cinderella has grown up in a family devoid of love. However, the ability for Cinderella to go to the ball is the apotheosis of the combined efforts of the people that do love her and want her to succeed. When she meets the prince who falls for her and who she loves back, it's the emotional climax of the lessons that she's been taught by the mice and Fairy Grandma. What is love?
So this is love. So this is what makes life divine.
Oh, so this is love. After the clock strikes 12, she's not concerned about the things she received or the grandeur of the palace. The takeaway she gets isn't how wonderful it felt to be royalty, but the experience and the people she met. She's not bitter that it didn't last longer. She's grateful to have been there in the first place.
But like all dreams, well, I'm afraid this can't last forever. You'll have only till midnight, and then...
Midnight? Oh, thank you.
Oh, no, just a minute. You must understand, my dear. On the stroke of 12, the spell will be broken, and everything will be as it was before.
Oh, I understand, but it's more than I ever hoped for. I guess I forgot about everything. Even the time, but it was so wonderful. And he was so handsome, and when we danced... Oh, I'm sure that even the prince himself couldn't have been more... Oh, well, it's over and...
She doesn't even know the man she danced with is the prince. Some have an issue with the fact that their relationship isn't really based on anything, and yeah, I agree. But the strength comes in what their relationship symbolizes. Cinderella's growth from an unloved child to a woman with a strong sense of conviction. The main takeaway that I got when watching the film was one of catharsis. We see Cinderella, who has been placed in a horrible situation, desperately wishing to escape. And in the end, she does. She dances with the prince, who is of a much higher class than she. And despite coming from a poor background, they fall in love. The reason we want to see her succeed is because of the empathy that we feel for someone in her circumstances. In the end, Cinderella was not saved by her material possessions, but by the strength of her heart. The film claims that optimism and being kind in the face of misery is intrinsically more valuable than putting down others to further your own self. Tremaine, and by extension Anastasia and Drizella, are punished because they value wealth and power over people. Simple, right? While impactful, in retrospect, this message has its fair share of flaws in its execution. When using kindness as a coping mechanism, she chooses to ignore the abusive parts of her family, ignoring the reality that her family is actively harming her in order to cope. This is shown when Cinderella tells Bruno to try to get along with Lucifer, despite the fact that Lucifer actively attacked Bruno and framed him for it. This is fine and tells us more about Cinderella and who she is. Cinderella, in the face of hardship, believes that being kind to each other is better than enacting revenge. However, in ignoring the bad parts of her family, she is unable to recognize the abuse that she suffered as a direct result of their actions. Acknowledging the abuse that you suffered is one of the first steps in healing. But the way the film is constructed, this aspect within Cinderella's cognition, the way she minimizes and denies the abusive parts of her childhood, is never explicitly addressed as a problem that she needs to overcome. If the story were about breaking away and pushing back against your abusers a la Tangled,
I'm a lost princess. Oh, please speak up, Rapunzel. You know how I hate the mumbling.
I am the lost princess, aren't I? Did I mumble, Mother? Or should I even call you that?
Cinderella's character flaw, ignoring the harmful elements of the world around her in favor of the good, is something that she needs to acknowledge in order to heal from the emotional scars of her youth. No, instead, it's Tremaine and her sisters that need to change. If her family were nicer to her and let her come to the ball, then she would be more happy, because she's already doing everything right. Cinderella's big stand-up-for-herself moment isn't a result of any emotional lesson that she learned, but purely physical. The subtext could imply that she eventually grows out of this mindset when she rebels in the end, but that's something we need to see. When Tremaine locks her in a room, Cinderella has no ability to do anything to improve her situation. She isn't saved by her own wits or intuition. She is entirely contingent on the mice getting the key that she needs to unlock the door. And don't get me wrong, this isn't me saying that being feminine and submissive is a bad thing. In fact, Cinderella's kindness and positive influence on nature is the indirect cause for her eventual ending, as without her compassion, there would be no mice, birds, or Bruno to get her the key. However, Cinderella's submissive nature is the thing that keeps her locked in her emotional prison. The final stretch of the film centers around her animal friends' wacky antics as they try to save her, but it completely forgets about Cinderella, not cutting to her for way longer than necessary.
What? Tea? Thank you, madam. No.
Her emotions and trauma aren't the centerpiece. The animal friends' wacky antics are. Her resolution isn't a result of anything from inside of Cinderella. It's not a battle of ideologies or wit or even ingenuity. Our antagonists and our protagonists are notably divorced from each other emotionally. Even as Cinderella reveals that she has the other glass slipper, how does Tremaine cope with the fact that her one goal in life was taken by someone she tried to subjugate? I don't know. Thematically fine, but the climax isn't framed around Cinderella or Tremaine. It's purely physical. These elements take strong parts of a film and weaken the whole. The part of the movie that resonates the most to me is the idea that Cinderella is breaking the cycle of abuse. Cinderella, who is haggard and emotionally beaten day in and day out, doesn't allow her resolve to crumble. Compare this to Anastasia and Drizella, who do perpetuate the cycle of abuse. They've allowed their will to become mangled and distorted to the point where they are simply tools for Tremaine. They're not even their own person anymore. In regards to abuse victims, the sad truth is that we see a lot more Anastasias than we do Cinderellas. For people who have been hurt and broken by their childhoods, the likelihood of their perspective of the world being colored by the unfortunate violence and pain of their upbringing goes up. Hurt people hurt. Cinderella makes the decision to be better than her mother. In the end, when Cinderella marries her prince and gets what she wants, it serves as a big middle finger to Tremaine and everything she was told she could never be. When she chooses to live for herself and have her night of self-care at the ball for once in her life, she is choosing to ignore the wishes of her mother and put herself first. But what about her sisters? If the message of Cinderella is remaining strong under abuse will ultimately give you a better life, the inverse of that would be cracking under the pressure will leave you miserable and lonely, trapping you where you are for an indiscreet amount of time. With this in mind, it's important to explore the dynamic of how Cinderella is treated by the film compared to how Anastasia and Drizella are treated. For me, as a viewer in the 21st century, I see both of these girls just as much as the victims as Cinderella. We can see this dynamic play out when it comes to the film's relationship with beauty. Looking at Cinderella through a modern feminist lens, we can take note of how standards have changed since the film's release in the 1950s. The film operates on the idea that Cinderella is more beautiful than that of her family, not just inwardly but outwardly as well. Their designs inform us of this dichotomy. Cinderella has markedly European features that are considered to be of value: a visible bust, blonde hair, blue eyes, and fair skin with a soft feminine disposition. In many ways, Cinderella is what was considered the ideal woman at the time: beautiful and domestic, selfless and kind. She is beautiful from the inside and out, and is ostensibly good. Compare this to her sisters, who are unattractive, oafish, and unruly. Not the ideal woman. Oh no. Contrast this with that of Lady Tremaine, who is old and therefore ugly. Tremaine is bitter towards Cinderella for her inherent physical beauty. The evil stepmother trope is one that was perpetuated by Disney themselves in Snow White and has cemented itself into popular culture. We especially see this in Drizella and Anastasia, who have been remembered across history as the ugly stepsisters.
May I present my daughters, Drizella, Anastasia.
Your Grace.
I give up.
I feel a little icky calling them the ugly stepsisters, but that's what the movie wants me to call them, so I guess. Drizella and Anastasia have notably flat chests and are drawn with their hair in clumps, as opposed to Cinderella's smooth locks. They are also drawn with visible facial wrinkles. The film also depicts both sisters to have poor musical ability, to contrast with Cinderella's angelic singing voice. This is seen in the way that Tremaine's cat, Lucifer, reacts to both performances. With Drizella's vocals, Lucifer is shown to be visibly disturbed, slamming the door on her performance to escape, choosing instead to listen to Cinderella, who sings angelically while she cleans.
Oh, sing, sweet nightingale, sing, sweet nightingale.
This, combined with the film telling us that the sisters are less good than Cinderella because they are less attractive, are major contributing factors to the way that the ugly stepsister trope has been seen in today's society. All of these elements work together to convey to the audience that Drizella and Anastasia are demonstrably evil and thus irredeemable. They are ugly and obnoxious and untalented, and therefore less valuable to the audience. In concept, this is perfectly fine. We want to root for Cinderella, who is kind-hearted and beautiful, and for 1950s audiences, this was all they needed. However, this obsession with the contrast in physical appearance between Cinderella and her sisters has not aged particularly well. Now, One might have reason to counter my interest in exploring both stepsisters in any meaningful way, saying something like, they don't need to have any sort of depth. They're mean and ugly because that's simply the way they are. They're villains in a fairy tale. It's not that deep, and we shouldn't care. Or alternatively, trying to justify the actions of abusers is inherently bad. And to that I say, fair enough, I guess, but this is an analysis channel, friend. Looking too deep into things that don't warrant it is literally what I do. And for the second remark, I think it's important to understand how people eventually grow to develop toxic mindsets so we can better understand how to prevent it from happening in the future. And also, they're literary characters, they're not real, come on people! When I see the movie present both girls in the way that it does in the piano room scene, I feel like it expects me to laugh at them embarrassing themselves because of their poor talent. Look at them! They are bad and ugly, so it's okay to laugh at them. It's like the Disney version of a feminist-owned cringe compilation. Their comedic value is intrinsically connected to how bad they are at everything. How they are portrayed in the Disney parks are an extension of this.
A moment, just with her?
Yeah, just with her, sorry.
Just with me! Anastasia!
Don't get me wrong, they're hilarious and really fun to watch from the 3 videos of them on YouTube. However, for me, I can't help but see 2 girls who live under the thumb of an authoritarian mother, and whose influence has twisted them into being just like her. Lady Tremaine constantly puts the 2 in competition with each other. They are consistently compared to one another, and because their mother values beauty above all else, that is what they have been raised to believe. We see them value material goods and status over other people, and perpetuate the idea that in order to get far in life, people are expendable. We can see this warped outlook on relationships in the way that Drizella and Anastasia are in constant war with each other, vying to be the better daughter in an effort to gain Tremaine's affection. These are all behaviors that Tremaine taught them, presumably from a young age.
Stand there, deliberately.
Girls, girls, your manners.
Above all, Tremaine wants to raise Anastasia and Drizella to be high society ladies so they can marry wealthy and reap the benefits. We see her act coldly to Cinderella, but this also extends to her own daughters. When Anastasia and Drizella bicker in the piano room, we can see Tremaine's parenting strategy at play. It's implied that it's normal for them both to be at each other's throats, so what she says here in response is interesting.
You did it on purpose. You always
Girls,
fighting
girls.
It's her fault, Mother.
Above all, self-control.
Instead of having a conversation with them about their overflowing emotions, teaching them how to process them in a healthy and productive way, she essentially tells them to stop. Stop it! Stop feeling that way right now! No! From this, we can infer that Anastasia and Drizella have grown up to deprioritize how they feel and their own individuality. Their emotions aren't valuable. How you appear to others is valuable and is directly tied to your success. Instead of being told that who they are is beautiful, they're told that who they are is going to be the thing that destroys them. We can see this obsession with beauty in the scene where they toss away their clothes in a rage. Of course, on a surface level, when we see both sisters actively trash the clothes that they've been given, we are drawn to the conclusion that they are vain and value petty things and are ungrateful for what they have, always wanting more. However, for me, I see 2 girls who are suffering from intense self-image issues, spawned from an upbringing that taught them that their value as women are entirely contingent on how they're perceived by others. Of course, both girls are going to feel ugly in those dresses. The dress itself is irrelevant. For people with such a warped view of themselves, they're going to look in the mirror with disdain no matter what they're wearing. With standards as high as Tremaine's, I'm led to believe that this fear of dehumanization at the hands of other people is the motivating factor behind their anger. Their inability to regulate their emotions stems from the lack of emotional stability that is meant to be provided by a parental figure. Refer back to this quote from Pete Walker. Emotional neglect alone causes children to abandon themselves and to give up on the formation of a self. They do so to preserve an illusion of connection with the parent and to protect themselves from the danger of losing that tenuous connection. This typically requires a great deal of self-abdication, i.e. the forfeiture of self-esteem, self-confidence, self-care, self-interest, self-protection. Children so need to believe that their parents love and care for them, that they will deny and minimize away evidence of the most egregious neglect and abuse. From here, we can see that despite the difference in reactions to their environment, Cinderella and her sisters are dealing with the same issues. In the movie, both girls act as an extension of Tremaine. They are her henchmen. Hench women. Feminism. Their identity is solely connected to their mother, and they have no individuality to speak of. They lack defining traits to distinguish themselves from one another, and instead act as a single entity, the daughters of Tremaine, not Anastasia and Drizella. To understand why Anastasia and Drizella react in the way that they do, it's important to understand the concept of emotional regulation under emotional neglect. Parental guidance is a crucial part of early childhood because children aren't born with the ability to understand themselves. I mean, look at this baby. You think he knows how to pay taxes? No, he doesn't. They need a guardian that will teach them the strategies to understand the world. When that guardian fails to emotionally support them, they never understand the importance of their emotions. But because they don't go away, they manifest in dark and undesirable ways. An article published in Science Direct Journal explores the relationship between childhood maltreatment and self-compassion. Maltreated adolescents may engage in self-harming or aggressive... You know what? No more. I'm sad. No more citations over expertly constructed orchestral music and aesthetically pleasing particle effects. I need to make this sexy. Maltreated adolescents may engage in self-harming or aggressive behaviors in an attempt to regulate the experience of negative emotions, which may arise from maltreatment memories or environmental cues. It reflects caregivers' failure to provide a developmentally appropriate and supportive environment, including such acts as denigration and lack of affection. This is a mindset that's not born, but bred. Tremaine drills into her daughters the idea that they must be beautiful in order to be loved. It can be speculated that they see Cinderella as having what they don't: beauty, kindness, joy. Cinderella is a trigger for them. Cinderella reminds them of their own feelings of inadequacy spawned from their mother's abusive tendencies. This is why we see both sisters misdirect their anger towards Cinderella. Yes, they do get more attention from their mother, but that doesn't mean that they're happy. The idea that they're entitled and spoiled because of the attention and the items that Tremaine give them doesn't make up for the emotional void that's been left in their hearts as consequence. They're externalizing their own feelings of self-deprecation and projecting it onto Cinderella. Because both sisters were never taught to value their own inherent beauty, they perceive Cinderella's as a legitimate threat to their livelihood. If Cinderella gets to marry the prince, then they are the ultimate failures. Maybe they're not just jealous of her looks, but of her ability to be herself despite her circumstances. This is why we see them perpetuate the environment that Tremaine has cultivated, mocking the idea that she could ever dance with a prince. They've been told that things like compassion and self-love are a threat, so In an effort to control the world around them, they try to suppress it because they don't know anything else. The key reason why Cinderella is able to remain resilient in the face of adversity is because of self-compassion. Self-compassion is an orientation towards seeing the world and the self, realistically but kindly, and in a contextualized manner supportive of greater well-being. It reflects a warm, accepting approach that is based on kindness, humaneness, and deliberate and reflective cognitive approach that emphasizes the present, here and now experience. Cinderella is able to thrive because she's able to see the value in herself and the world around her. She's regularly involved in the lives of the animals around her home. Not just her mice family, but Bruno, Lucifer, the birds outside her home, and the entire LGBT community. Because she is able to have compassion for nature, she, in turn, is able to have compassion for herself. In short, she has something to live for. That same journal I mentioned earlier conducted a study on victims of childhood emotional neglect aged 13 to 19, giving them a survey that would measure the level of their abuse in relation to their self-compassion. It is hypothesized that self-compassion would be inversely associated with maltreatment, and in particular with emotional maltreatment. Self-compassion would be inversely related to health risk behaviors, such that maltreated youths with higher self-compassion scores would report fewer indices of maltreatment-related impairment, e.g. mood, anxiety, suicidality, and substance abuse. Cinderella's resilience is directly linked to her compassion for her environment, herself, and her real family and her mice. These are things that Anastasia and Drizella can't have. When your heart is locked in a chain of lies and self-doubt, there isn't any room for compassion. Emphasizing the stepsisters' victimhood doesn't excuse their actions. Abused people can perpetuate the cycle of abuse. Hurt people hurt people. When I see Anastasia and Drizella assault Cinderella, shredding her dress in intense frustration, I see two broken girls desperately trying to preserve the world that their mother has constructed around them out of fear. Within this story, they're still young, and like Cinderella, don't understand the world outside of the one constructed for them. However, in this first movie, both sisters exist only as an extension of Tremaine's power. I think Tremaine is the kind of person to feed off of negative emotion. For her, when Anastasia and Drizella get angry, Tremaine makes it a point to divert all of the attention off of her and on to Cinderella.
Charles, please. After all, we did make a bargain. How very clever. These beads, they give it just the right touch. Don't you think so, Drizella?
No, I don't. I think she's...
Both girls try on the glass slipper despite knowing it will fit neither of them because Tremaine wants them to. They're framed as selfish for wanting the shoe to so desperately fit despite it clearly being too small to, but desperation stems from fear. The film tells us that obviously no one will want to marry Anastasia and Drizella. They're unattractive. Men don't want to marry ugly women. Dummy. Cinderella's feet are tiny, not like their big, ugly man feet. An assumption can be made that they are undesirable as romantic partners for their personalities and selfishness as well, but this ultimately ties back to them being an extension of Tremaine as opposed to beings of their own autonomy with their own desires. When Tremaine stresses the idea of self-control to her daughters, she is encouraging them to suppress their emotions. But those emotions never go away. They fester and build and build and build until they boil to a head, with Cinderella being their target. Without the tools to be able to distance yourself from the abuse and take an introspective look at your life and what you've been through, it can be difficult for someone to recognize that their behavior is toxic, especially in an environment where it's encouraged and rewarded. Cinderella has her LGBT mice, who are there to serve as an example for what it feels like to have a healthy relationship. But for Anastasia and Drizella, they're utterly helpless to be able to imagine any kind of world without their mother, let alone one where they have happy, fulfilling relationships. If we need to recontextualize Cinderella as a victim of abuse, then we need to do the same for Anastasia and Drizella. With this information, I am sent the implicit message that those who are like Cinderella and are able to remain strong in the face of adversity deserve a better life. But those who are like Anastasia and Drizella and crack under the pressure deserve exactly what's coming to them. When the film frames them as mean, vapid harpies, I'm left with an era of uncomfortability. I want for them to escape their situation too. But knowing the fairy tale I'm watching, it's something that I know will never happen. They're victims trapped in a toxic environment, framed as the villains in a story forever locked by time. And that, to me, is intensely more tragic than simply writing them off as bad people. So, is that true? Are Anastasias more predisposed to suffer than Cinderella's? This is the fundamental flaw with how Cinderella presents its story. Without acknowledging the pain and suffering that her stepsisters are going through, it tells us that letting your heart become warped by your upbringing is a completely evil thing. But we can't control how we were raised. It's not our fault. It's not our fault. Here's the thing. Lashing out hurts. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be upset. As much as we'd like to try, we don't get to control which emotions we feel. But we have a responsibility to control how we act on them so our trauma doesn't result in someone else's. It may be a reason why we hurt others, but it's not an excuse. I'm not asking you to know all the secrets to the universe. You don't even need to like yourself. Just love something and let that motivate you. If you can love something, anything, it can be nature or your friends or your favorite color. If you can be kind to something, then you can be kind to yourself. We don't all have a fairy godmother. We don't all have a strong support system. And if you don't, we can be our own. That's a perfectly valid option. We can't control how we were raised, but we can control how we heal. Healing doesn't happen in a night. It takes some serious work to be able to undo the baggage of our childhoods, but that doesn't mean that you don't deserve it. There are so many resources that I found online researching this video, and it helped me learn a lot about myself and my experiences. I'll link some resources down below. There's a technique called reparenting yourself, where you essentially teach yourself the skills that your guardians neglected to. And that's really significant. We can break the cycle. We can do better than our parents. I think that's the most important lesson we can learn from this movie, from the words of Fairy Grandma.
Because even miracles take a little time.
Miracles?
Mm-hmm.
And that's my dissertation on why Disney adult should be classified as a slur. Huh, you know, you make a lot of good points. Thanks. Except for that slur one, I don't know what that's about. Oh, hey, what's that noise? Probably a lost, lonely child's desperate cry for the care of her family. Believe it or not, it happens all the time. That sounds just a little dystopian. Oh, don't we all? I don't know, shouldn't we help her? My God, no! Society has deemed it non-permissible to meddle in another family's affairs. She needs to learn on her own to become well-adjusted. We're going to let her suffer in silence. You're weird. No, you're weird. You know, you make a lot of good points, but I don't know, I'm still not convinced. I feel like from everything I know about Cinderella through pop culture, I'm having a tough time swallowing this pill. Okay. Were you paying attention to the whole thing? Nope. Well, at least you're honest. Hi, thank you for making it this far. If you're listening to this, hurl your worst insult at Walt Disney in the below. If you want more, I'd really appreciate if you gave a like and and if you want more, I have about 40 minutes of cut content on my Patreon. So if you want to hear me complain, I guess you could do that. I have plans to analyze the other Cinderella movies, so if you want that, let me know. Okay, bye.